So I thought I'd try something a little different today. This is a discussion I've wanted to have for quite some time because I've seen this discussion on the Stanley Kubrick subreddit quite a lot, and it's something I've flip-flopped on myself. So I want to set the record straight on the whole situation, and this situation is the Stanley Kubrick aspect ratio controversy. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? So what I'm going to do is first I'll discuss the reasons why this controversy exists, and then I'll go over each aspect ratio that people seem to believe is the correct one, and why people believe it's the correct one, and whether I agree or disagree. So without further ado, let's get into it. There are two reasons why this controversy is a thing. We will start with television. The reason television is one of the reasons why this controversy exists comes down to the technique called pan and scan. When it came to widescreen films that were wider than a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio, or 4:3, the technique to get around that would be panning and scanning, which is basically the idea of taking a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio portion of the widescreen, like so, and then cropping it down to that, so that's all you're left with, and then putting that as the televised version. The story goes that Stanley Kubrick saw a version of 2001: A Space Odyssey where it had gone from this to that, and he was beyond unimpressed with this, and he wanted to find a way of making sure that this doesn't happen to his movies again. Reason 2 is the multiplex film system. At the time, most cinemas were just single theaters. And at these single theaters, the projector would run the film through at a 1.37 to 1 aspect ratio. Whether it was widescreen or not was defined by either a gate, which would crop it down to a widescreen aspect ratio, or by an anamorphic lens, which is a completely different setup that we're not going into at all because Kubrick generally didn't shoot with anamorphic lenses. For Kubrick's films, his films would be presented at widescreen by feeding the 1.37 to 1 aspect ratio film through the projector and then putting a gate in front of the projector that would set it to 1.66 to 1, so it would look like this. The problem was that in the 1970s and 1980s, multiplexes were becoming a thing, and the standard aspect ratio for the films became 1.85 to 1, or 2.39 to 1, the general anamorphic thing. So the films would look something a little like this. And Kubrick realized that to continue to cooperate with the multiplexes, he would have to change his approach to cinematography. And given that he also had to change his approach to cinematography for the TV, this is where it all snowballs into the controversy. So let's get right into all the aspect ratios and whether they're considered right or wrong. We'll begin with the 1.37 to 1, the fully open frame. People will make arguments that this or 1.33 to 1, the 4:3, which is only negligibly different to be honest, would be the correct aspect ratio because it's the full frame of what he shot. And in terms of home video release, this is what he intended. But the reason I disagree is because this is not how it was theatrically shown. I think with the technology we have available to us today, we should be able to see the film as it was intended to be seen in theaters on our modern television screens, because we've come a long way from the old square TVs where widescreen looked slightly less aesthetically pleasing, shall we say. So also I think in Kubrick's final 3 movies, the full frame cuts have a bit too much headspace, because they were actually composed for not 1.33 to 1, they were just protected for that so they'd go to TV. So that's why I'm not too keen on the so-called full frame aspect ratios. So again, that's the 1.37 to 1 and the 1.33 to 1 comparison. As I said, they're negligibly different, but also the DVDs of The Shining Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, the 3 films that this whole controversy surrounds, are also slightly zoomed in as well. Why? Fuck you, that's why. Now we get to the 1.66 to 1 aspect ratio. Now, I've seen a few people, and in the past myself included, argue that The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut should be shown at this one because A, it was the European standard, or at least so I believed, at the time, and it's also a compromise between the aspect ratio, like the 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, and the 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. However, there is no evidence at all that Kubrick ever really intended for his final 3 movies to be seen in this aspect ratio. My defense of wanting to see these movies in 1.66 to 1 is entirely based on simple speculation, because most of Kubrick's films before The Shining were in this ratio, with the exception of his first 2 films, which were just shown at the Academy ratio, and Spartacus in 2001, which were at 2.2 to 1. So my speculation is that Kubrick always preferred 1.66 to 1 and would have continued to shoot his films in it had he not had to conform to the 1.85 to 1 system at the American multiplexes. And so that's a flimsy argument to be mucking around with the aspect ratio of a film, so we shall say no more about that. Now we get to the 1.78 to 1 aspect ratio, the aspect ratio of all the Blu-ray releases of Kubrick's final 3 movies. And this is the one that actually makes my blood boil the most. The reasoning for this cropping down to this aspect ratio is because it's the same shape as the TVs we have today, and the crew responsible for making the Blu-rays want to continue to subscribe to Kubrick's policy of make it fit the TV from the DVD home releases back when we had the more square 1.331 TVs. My issue with that is, first of all, Kubrick is dead, so we have no idea whether he would have wanted to continue to do it this way with the modern TVs, because a lot of them do feel like you could set up your own mini cinema in your movies. It's a very different experience from the old TVs, so we have no idea how he would have interpreted that. Second of all, and this is just personal to me, so this has nothing to do with what Kubrick wanted or anything, but second of all, cropping it down to 1.78 to 1 to fill the TV makes it look made for TV, which somehow makes it look cheaper. This is probably just a psychological thing to do with me, but all the same, I dislike it. It's also interesting to note that the initial release of Barry Lyndon was also released in this 1.78 to 1 aspect ratio, until a memo was unearthed where Kubrick specifically said it was filmed for 1.66 to 1, and his personal assistant responsible for the Blu-ray release, Leon Vitali, had misinterpreted Kubrick's intentions, so when it was re-released on Blu-ray by the wonderful Criterion Collection, it was put back at 1.66 to 1, and good for them. So now we get to our final aspect ratio, 1.85 to 1. This is the aspect ratio in which these 3 films were originally shown at the theaters, and it is, my opinion, the correct aspect ratio for these final movies. Now, as I said earlier, I would prefer the slightly taller 1.66 to 1 because I don't know, I just like the aesthetic. But this is what Kubrick's intentions for these films to be seen were. And if you have any doubt about it, just look at his notes in the storyboards for the film. It specifically says 1.85 to 1, but protect for 1.33 to 1 so we can put it on TV later. So, in my opinion, these days, that is how these movies should be seen. And just for giggles, I'm just going to compare all of the aspect ratios there. So you can see it's kind of a mess. But the innermost layer is how his films were intended to be seen on the big screen, and I believe because of the technology we have available today and how different television technology is back then from when he made the movies, I believe this is the best way to appreciate his movies. I apologize if that was not as coherent as it should be, but this is like my third time trying this video, and frankly, I'm sick of it. I'm glad that I went into something a bit different this time, and I hope you guys learned a thing or two from it. And yeah, I'll probably just post this up on the subreddit so I can get shouted at. Should be fun. Anyway, in the meantime, I'll get back to actual proper movie reviews when university stops being a thing. In the meantime, enjoy life, and I'll see you later. Also, do all those things that you're supposed to do to a YouTube channel, like subscribe, whatever.